Hello, and thank you for tuning in to Mortal Dilemmas. This channel is still very much alive. However, I've been working 12-hour days, 7 days a week generally, and I haven't had as much time in the last month to record. I was officially hired on Halloween, which is kind of exciting. Anyhow, welcome back, and today we will be hearing 6 stories submitted by Lyshaninja on Skinwalkers. Enjoy! This is a story my family told me when I was growing up. We live in a rural community on the Navajo reservation. My aunt and her 2 brothers were home alone while my grandparents had left for the evening to attend a chapter house meeting. They were in the house, and like many people from the reservation, they didn't have electricity. It had been dark outside for about an hour, and my aunt and uncles were getting ready for bed. Outside they heard noises, as if someone was moving things around. My oldest uncle went to look out the front window and saw a figure out by the truck. This was immensely out of the ordinary, because the closest neighbor was miles away. Whatever it was opened the truck door and began to dig through the personal items that my family had left in the vehicle. My aunt and uncles were frightened by the sight and knew they should take action. They took out the rifle and all steadied themselves to hold it up. They flung open the door and aimed the gun at the dark figure. The figure turned and started to walk toward them, totally unfazed by the weapon. My uncle pulled the trigger, but nothing happened. The figure drew closer, and my aunt began to smell something like a rotting corpse. It was so strong it made her gag. My uncle continued to pull the trigger with no luck, and the figure came closer and closer. Off in the distance, headlights were coming up the road. My grandparents were returning. The figure looked towards the lights and started to move away, and tucked itself behind a tree near the house. My oldest uncle ran toward the truck with the gun. My grandfather got out of the car and my uncle pointed to the tree. The thing was poking out its head to observe what they were doing. My grandfather ran into the house and over to the stove and grabbed a handful of ashes and rubbed it over the gun and placed an ash-covered bullet into the chamber. He walked out onto the porch and fired towards the tree. Whatever that thing was didn't expect the gun to go off. The gunshot echoed and the dark figure began running. My grandma chased my aunt inside, and my uncles and grandfather went after it. There weren't many roads or paths, so as my grandfather and uncles chased after the figure, the truck was bouncing and the headlights were not fixed in one particular spot. My uncle swears that whenever the headlights would hit the figure, he saw a woman running on all 4s like a bear. My grandfather eventually stopped the truck, and as they neared the ditch that drops about 20 feet, he got out and began to yell in Navajo. My uncle says that he was yelling about a local woman. He yelled that he wasn't scared, and that he knew it was her, and to leave his family alone. A few days passed, and there was news that the woman my grandfather was yelling about had passed. I've always been told that if you know who the Skinwalker is, say their name, and it will kill them. My cousin lived in the eastern agency of the Navajo Nation in a community known as Crown Point. She was still living with her parents at this time, and was a good girl. She had good grades, a nice ride, and was a very popular girl that played on the basketball team. When she told us this story, it was very out of the ordinary, and the events that followed would also deepen my beliefs in the traditional Navajo way, and of the taboos associated with the Navajo culture. My cousin was coming home from basketball practice, which ran past sunset. It was during the colder months, and so it was dark by the time she pulled into her neighborhood. She pulled into the small house and community that she lived in. It was far from a fenced community, but there were streetlights and the neighbors weren't too far from one another. As she neared her home, she saw a group of dogs. This wasn't unlikely, as there are random packs of stray dogs that roam rural communities. These dogs don't belong to anyone, and they get food where they can get it. As she got closer, she noticed that something was off about the dogs. There were 4 of them, and they were sitting in a circle all facing each other. This really didn't faze her until she spoke about the event later. Because this was a housing community, my cousin couldn't barrel down the road. So she slowly drove past the group of dogs and kept going on her way. As she continued to drive, she noticed in her peripheral vision that something was running alongside her car. She turned her head to see that a brown dog from the group was trotting along the side of her car. She didn't mind much until she hit a strategically placed speed bump. The impact of the bump made her entire car wobble. She looked over at the dog again, still casually keeping pace with the car. She tried to ignore the dog and tried speeding up, keeping in mind where the speed bumps were placed. The dog continued to keep pace. My cousin had to eventually stop at a stop sign. She began to feel immensely uncomfortable and tried to keep her eyes forward, but curiosity got the best of her. She looked over at the dog. It was facing forward. She continued to stare, and that is when the dog turned its head. Instead of the face of a dog, there was the flat face of a man covered in hair and smiling from ear to ear. Fear shot through her body, and my cousin pushed the pedal to the floor, not daring to look back in her rearview mirror. She reached her house and barely pulled herself in the door, weak from fear. My aunt came to her, and my cousin began to sob. She told my aunt everything, and they scheduled a meeting with a medicine man the next day. That night, my cousin was trying to get some rest. She was tossing and turning and felt very ill. She could hear people outside laughing and talking in Navajo, but she didn't think too much of it because they lived in a community near plenty of neighbors. At the medicine man, he told my cousin that she was very fortunate. The Skinwalker wasn't meant for her. She just happened to spot it while it was out to bring another person misfortune. He also told her that the laughing and talking that she had heard in the night was the Skinwalker talking to his friends, letting them know that someone had saw him and that he had scared her. The medicine man told my cousin that if the Skinwalker had been for her and she had seen him like that, it could have very well killed her. After that encounter, my cousin suffered from many ailments and had to stop playing basketball for a while. She had many ceremonies and eventually got back on her feet. My mom told us this story on the many nights that our electricity went out. When I asked my cousin about it, she confirms it's true, but doesn't like talking about it much. Out on the Navajo reservation, we don't have the city come and collect our trash. So we burn our trash in these huge burning barrels. Not very eco-friendly, I know, but that's what we got. If you don't light the trash properly, the fire will go out and the trash will just sit in the barrel. This is important, because we are told to dispose of personal hygiene items correctly. If you removed all your hair from your brush, make sure the trash burned. If it was that time of the month, make sure the trash burned. If you changed the baby's diaper, make sure the trash burned. They tell us these things because skinwalkers have been known to dig through the trash in order to find things that they can use against us. They use the things that we are briefly connected to and bring misfortune on us using these things. Some of my family members take part in the sport of rodeo. So to practice, they have a roping dummy and take turns roping it. My 2 male cousins were enjoying themselves outside and taking turns swinging the rope at the fake calf. The elders are always adamant that we shouldn't stay out past sundown, especially out on the res, where it's pitch black and there's no one for miles around. But my cousins aren't the superstitious type, and they were under the streetlight. My cousins are joking and laughing, having a great time. That changes when my eldest cousin looks over to the burn barrel. A dark figure is bent over and rummaging through the garbage that failed to burn. my cousins devise a plan that they are going to grab weapons, sticks and rocks, and go chase whatever it is. They move strategically so that they are able to flank the figure. They run full speed at it and begin yelling and swinging their sticks and throwing their rocks. My cousins stated that they kept up with it for the most part. That was, until the figure ran under the streetlight. What my cousins thought was that this person was actually a goat. Why would they think it was a person? Because the goat was running on its hind legs. They stopped running, and fear ran down their backs as the figure ran off into the dark. Feeling nervous, and not entirely accepting what they just saw, they began roping the dummy again. There was an awkward silence among the boys now. They just saw something unnatural, but talking about it now would just make it seem real. Were they crazy, or did they really see a skinwalker? The boys roped the dummy in silence until one of them looked over to the tree. There was a head peeking out at them. If they didn't pay attention to it, whatever it was would poke its head out from behind the tree and stare. When they would look in the direction of the tree, it would quickly move back out of sight. This was the final straw, and my cousins ran back to the house. They told their parents, and my uncle came out to look. It was still there, poking its head out and going back behind the tree. My uncle loaded his gun and started walking toward the tree. He aimed and pulled the trigger, but nothing happened. The gun jammed. Whatever it was began to run, but it was so fast. Like a blur, as my cousin describes. When it left, my uncle came in and gave the boys a thorough lecture about staying out late. The next day, my cousins told my uncle that whatever this thing is had been digging through the trash barrel. They went to investigate, and the creature had pulled a lot of things out of the barrel. What was odd was the tracks. Goat prints were all around the area. They followed a set of tracks, and there they found a baby diaper, several feet away from the barrel. Whatever they saw that night had very malevolent intentions. My cousins say that although the sight was ungodly, they know what they saw and stand by their claims. The Navajo Reservation is the largest reservation in the United States. It goes into New Mexico, Utah, Colorado, and Arizona. This story takes place in the northeast region of Arizona, near Indian Wells. This was told by people from around that area. If you were heading west on State Highway 15, out towards Dilkin, you come to a stretch of road that comes to a small valley. I remember going down this road in my youth. If you looked at the horizon, it would seem as if the road kept going. Then suddenly your car would be pulled down by gravity as you followed the road. It would always give me butterflies when we would go down the slope. When I heard the story about this road, it made my stomach feel different. A man was driving home one night, and it was very late. It was a drive that he had done before, so he wasn't too bothered by it. When you are driving on the reservation, sometimes there isn't any way to keep cattle from getting on the road. No fences means that you need to be extra aware. I was always told to look for the black horse. If you see a black horse, then you'll be able to see anything else that may wander into the path of your vehicle. So this man is driving home, not paying too much attention. He drives down the slope, but when he gets to the bottom of the valley he sees it, but doesn't have enough time to react. Suddenly, a horse comes out of the darkness. He slams on his brakes, but he is unable to stop and hits the horse with his truck. The impact was not enough to deploy the airbags, but the man was tossed around quite a bit by the incident. He turns on his emergency lights and gets out of the car to assess the damage. The front of the car was crumpled and one of the headlights was destroyed. He cursed out loud. This was the worst place to have an accident, and he didn't have a signal to phone for help. He then remembered the horse. The man went into the cab of his truck and got a small keychain flashlight. He started shining around, looking for the wounded animal. He heard noises, but they didn't sound like a horse. He was positive that what he hit was a horse. As he approached the sounds, he could see the animal's fur moving from its ragged breathing. As he got closer, he began to realize what it was. There was a naked elderly woman, wrapped in a large pelt. She was moaning from pain. The man stopped dead in his tracks and got weak from fear. He stumbled back to his truck, and although it suffered plenty of damage, he was able to get it started and drove off. Once he was able to get signal, he called the authorities. An ambulance drove out there and recovered the woman. She was driven to a local healthcare facility. Due to the fact that many of the healthcare staff were Navajo, no one wanted to touch the woman. The woman was known in the community, and she was thought to be bedridden. This was shocking because she was so far from home, and the state she was in was immensely off-putting. She still had on her attire from when she arrived at the hospital. The nurses called her family to come in. When her family got there, they removed her pelt and her jewelry. The staff were very frightened, but there was some non-Navajo staff that still provided her with care. The elderly woman had only bumps and scrapes. Other than that, she seemed just fine. She was able to get up and walk around that same evening. She went home with her family that night, but after a couple of days, she had passed. In the Navajo culture, if you find out who a Skinwalker is, you have the power to destroy them. After the community around Indian Wells found out who, or more fittingly, what this woman was, it was for certain that her time was at an end. In the traditional Navajo way, Skinwalkers are seen as witches, but they weren't always seen that way. My late grandmother, who was a medicine woman that practiced the blessings way, told me the origins of the Skinwalker. Being a Skinwalker wasn't always seen as a bad thing. In fact, they were seen as people with amazing gifts. They could change into the form of any animal, run vast distances very quickly, mimic people's voices, and some were known to use magic. During colonization, Skinwalkers were used to relay messages between war camps and spy on the enemy without being detected. Having the Skinwalker abilities was a gift. When we lost, the good of the community took a back seat and people began to focus on themselves. Instead of sharing what you had, people began to look after their own families, claiming property and livestock. And there were people that got the short end of the stick. Jealousy is a terrible thing. People became jealous of one another, and wanted more fortunate people to lose what they had. They looked to Skinwalkers who had otherworldly powers to do their bidding. Now being a Skinwalker is not a gift. You condemn yourself to a life of unhappiness and anger. In order to become a Skinwalker, you must sacrifice someone that you love very much. This shows that you are indeed committed to depravity. The interesting thing is that you could have met a Skinwalker and not even know it. They are people like you or me that have chosen a path in which they will hurt others. Navajos want to separate themselves from death of any kind. We burn clothing and personal items of deceased relatives, and it is very taboo to keep anything that belongs to the dead. Keeping such items can make a person sick or suffer horrible events in their life. However, Skinwalkers surround themselves with death. Skinwalkers have been known to grave rob and search through people's garbage. They use bones and hair from the dead, and victims' personal items to create bundles. They place these bundles near a person's home, and bad luck will fall upon the person. I bring this up because in my upcoming stories I'll start addressing the bundles and retelling skinwalking stories from my immediate family and myself. My oldest sister marches to the beat of her own drum, and this story is about her. In her younger days, my sister was very much interested in the rodeo scene. My family actually has a pretty impressive legacy when it comes to the sport. My sisters didn't compete, but had plenty of friends and family that they would go and watch. My two sisters would travel around the southeast following the rodeo circuit. The cowboy lifestyle isn't always glamorous. It can be filled with alcoholism, drugs, and depression. Unfortunately, this took hold of my sister, and she got in trouble with the law. My sister was looking at jail time, and the family was concerned about what might happen to her. This was very out of the ordinary for her. My mother went to a local medicine man, and they talked about the next steps. They decided to have a ceremony for my oldest sister. A few days passed, and it was time for the ceremony. The medicine man and his wife showed up a little past dusk. They came into our house and we served them the food we had prepared. Everyone chatted for a bit, and when we finished eating and cleaned up, it was time to start. Everyone sat down in the living room in a large circle. The medicine man sat on the far west side of the room. My oldest sister sat to his left. In the middle of the circle was a large pile of sand that was smoothed out on the top. My uncles got hot coals from the fire and placed them on the sand. The medicine man prayed in Navajo and sang blessing songs. This went on into the night. At the height of the ceremony, the medicine man turned to my oldest sister and told her they would have to go outside and pray in the darkness. He told her not to look around as he is singing. He told her to keep her eyes on him. The medicine man, my sister, and my uncle went outside. The medicine man turned around and began singing in the darkness. My sister was watching him sing, trying to keep her focus on only him. Then she heard it. Off in the distance, she heard someone whistle. This made her feel sick to her stomach. Our elders tell us about our culture's taboos, starting at a young age. One of the biggest things that they stress is to never whistle at night. They tell us only the dead whistle at night. So when my sister heard whistling out in the darkness, fear gripped her heart. She was so scared that tears began to well up in her eyes. The whistling got louder and louder, as if whatever it was moving closer and closer. My uncle was also outside during the prayer. He admits that he was scared too, but he wanted to be there for my sister. What my uncle saw was even more miraculous. He claims that as the medicine man sang, a bundle came up from above. The eagle feathers that the medicine man was holding opened up like a hand. The bundle gently floated down into the feathers, and the feathers closed around the bundle. The medicine man stopped singing, and the group went back into the house. My sister stumbled in, clearly shaken from the experience. The medicine man could see how my sister was. She asked him what he was whistling. He told her that it was a Skinwalker, and that he was trying to call the bundle back to it. We gathered around to see what was in the bundle. The medicine man opened up what looked to be a leather pouch. Inside of the pouch was a bone about 1 inch wide and 3 inches long. Upon closer inspection, the bone was hollowed out, and more items were shoved inside of the bone, held in place with twigs and dirt. He dissected the bone to find hair and pieces of a shirt, both belonging to my sister, and a very tiny drawing of a woman behind bars. Whatever was calling out to this bundle had very ill intentions for my sister. Fortunately, after the ceremony, all of my sister's charges were dismissed. I asked my sister what they did with the bundle, and she said that she wasn't really sure. She said that she vividly remembers being very scared when they were outside singing. My sister controls her emotions very well, and so I can't even begin to fathom how scared she must have felt in that moment. Personally, I find it hard to believe that these events are merely coincidental. Hey, thank you for listening, and thank you to Lyshaninja for submitting her true Skinwalker stories. Keep your ears peeled for a possible collaboration coming up in the future. As long as this gentleman still wants to collaborate with me, I will be uploading that next. Alright, thank you guys very much, and have a great day.